All right, you guys, so the day has come. We are gonna start adding our underglaze and begin our Sgraffito. Before we talk about that, I just really wanna quickly talk through prepping your clay to be able to do the Sgraffito. As I looked at your projects, as you transferred your design onto your clay, I've noticed that on some of your projects, some of you press quite deep into your clay and it produced really deep lines and a lot of crumbs, as opposed to kind of like a more shallow line. So if that is you, that is fine. I'm going to show you what you can do to make it ready for Sgraffito. Basically, you can just smooth in those lines a little bit. And it's okay if it smudges it even, to make it a little unclear. I'm removing these crumbs as I go, but I'm applying some pressure so those lines aren't quite so deep, and then I'll make things a little bit easier when it comes time to apply my underglaze. So I'm just applying pressure with my thumb here and smoothing over those lines so that they're nice and shallow. I should still be able to see them, but it's not going to be a problem. The other thing you want to do is just make sure all your crumbs and cracks are removed from the surface of your clay. Once you start with Sgraffito, it's hard to go back and smooth. And then once you're done smoothing and getting this ready for Sgraffito, please, 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 on the back or bottom of your piece, write your first and last name. This will make it easier for me to get it back to you once we figure out how to do drop off and pick up with firing. Okay, so once I have this done, I'm gonna take it, I'm gonna start thinking about where my underglaze needs to go. Think about your design. What is white in your design? What is black in your design? We only have this much underglaze, that's it. So we have to be really careful to not apply it in a wasteful way. So what we're gonna do is think through where to apply our underglaze before we start. So for me, I'm looking at my design. The background behind my swan will be black with white lines. So I'm gonna plan to paint the whole background black, solid, and I'll go back in and carve those white lines. My swan is going to be white with small black lines. Now, I'm not going to just paint the whole thing black, because that means I'd have to carve out all of these white sections eventually, which will take a lot of time. Instead, I'm going to think through where on my swan are those black lines, and I will paint that on kind of in a loose way, and later I'll go in to carve the details away. I'll show you what I mean in a second. Once you have thought through where your underglaze will go, then get set up with either a paintbrush. I would recommend a paintbrush if you have one. If you don't have one, you can also use your sponge to apply the paint. I'll show you how to do both. So you're gonna take your underglaze, hopefully you haven't opened this yet, and get something to kind of give it a little stir. So I'm gonna use my paintbrush here, stir it up. The reason we can put this on before it's been fired is because this is underglaze. It's basically like a colored slip, so it will adhere to our clay. Once you have that mixed up, I'll show you how to use the sponge first, and then I'll show you how to use the paintbrush. So to use your sponge, you're gonna take a clean sponge, make sure the clay is all rinsed out of that, and I'm gonna kind of bend it like this, dip it in my underglaze like this, and I can just kind of blot it on. Notice I'm doing this in kind of like a thinner coat. I don't want big blobs of underglaze. So that's one approach that you could take with the sponge. If you're using the brush, you're just gonna go in and paint where you're gonna have that black underglaze. So again, for me, the background of my swan is gonna be black. So I'm painting around my swan everywhere I want to be black. And this is what I mean by painting loosely where I want the black lines. I know the whole wing is not going to be black, but I know I want some black features on there. So I'm just going to go ahead and add some general lines that I'll carve away later. I know some of the beak will be black. Once your first coat is dry, you'll notice when you can tilt it and you don't see any more shine. It should look a little bit dull or matte. No paint should come up on your finger when you touch it. Once you're done your first coat, you're gonna go ahead and give it a second coat. When you're done painting your second coat, let the second coat dry, and then you'll move on to the next step whenever your clay is leather hard. When your clay is leather hard, it should be a little bit more firm than when you're building with it, and it should be not like wet to the touch. So if I touch this, I should not have clay coming off on my hand. When your clay's leather hard, it will be much easier to do the next step. So if you need to wait a day to have it dry out a little bit more, I'd recommend once your underglaze is dry, put your piece into a bag and leave the bag slightly open. You do not want this to completely dry out. It should not change colors, but it should be a little bit more firm so that it will be easier to carve. So go ahead and paint your 2 coats of underglaze and then wait until your clay is leather hard to move on to the next step.